Saints Row 2 is one of those weird games that as the years go on, people seem to appreciate more. I mean, if you've never played Saints Row 2 and are watching this gameplay, you're probably wondering what the big deal is. And I get it, the game looks rough. I mean, it even looked rough when it first released. But Saints Row 2 just has that special sauce that the series has been trying to recreate ever since. So this video is basically just an excuse for me to play Saints Row 2 again. But if you think I've missed anything, then let me know in the comments and I'll be sure to check it out. Don't forget to leave a like if you have a letter of the alphabet in your name, and without further delay, let's get started. Right, let's begin with a giant pink rabbit. If you head to this location on the map, you can find a small island with an arrow. And if you follow the arrow, you will eventually find another arrow. Repeat this process a couple of times, and eventually you'll find this. So this giant pink rabbit isn't actually a rabbit. This is a cabbit from Summoner, another Volition-developed game that was released all the way back in the year 2000. The cabbit would go on to feature in future Saints Row games, including the Saints Row reboot, where it was shoved inside a garage. And considering how that game turned out, perhaps that was for the best. So I'm guessing that at some point or another, we've all left a game sitting at the main menu whilst we do something else. The thing is, in Saints Row 2, this might actually prove to be useful. You see, if you wait at the game's main menu long enough, several in-game TV channels will begin to play. Now, in typical Saints Row 2 fashion, these are pretty funny. But there is an advert that pops up for a few seconds before disappearing again. This advert offers viewers free money with a phone number to call. Well, if you dial the number in-game, you will activate the Give Cash cheat, which gives you $1,000, which is really cool. Speaking of doing nothing, next up is an idle animation that I'm hoping that a lot of you weren't aware of. If you head to a nightclub and wait for a while, this will happen.
Yeah!
Yes!
That's right! Yeah!
So one of the best things about Saints Row 2 is the city itself. Stillwater is full of interesting locations, which makes getting from point A to point B never a chore. One of these interesting locations is the nuclear waste facility. This island is full of a dangerous looking green liquid, and you can even spot some of the local wildlife swimming in the waste. Well, if you take a closer look, you may notice that one of the fish has 2 heads and another has 3 eyes. Which, given that this is nuclear waste, is hardly surprising. Now, I'm guessing that the fish with the 3 eyes is a reference to the fish with 3 eyes seen in The Simpsons, which is a nice reference. As far as the 2-headed fish, well, I don't know what that one could be a reference to, so leave your theories in the comments down below. Also, at the nuclear waste facility, if you manage to land on this roof, you can find this.
Big umbrella to shade the city from the sun.
So this one is kind of weird. You see, the location is called Nuke Launch Room, but all that we can find in the room is a lone man, a gun, and a whole bunch of blow-up dolls. I mean, if this is who is in charge of launching nuclear bombs, God help us all. Oh, and something else that I noticed here is if you wait too long, everything in the room will disappear apart from the man and the gun, which is really strange. So this next Easter egg is kind of random, even for a game like Saints Row 2. At this location on the map, you can find this. So, an abandoned hockey mask next to a lake, which is a reference to Jason Voorhees, who despite being a terrifying serial killer, cannot swim. Picking up the mask and walking away will turn it into a skull, and that's where the Easter egg ends. Though I can't help but think there is more to it. I remember that back in the day, people claimed that taking the mask would cause a man with a machete to spawn, but obviously that doesn't happen. But the fact that the mask changes cannot be for nothing. Though, let's face it, Saints Row 2 is kind of buggy, so maybe it wasn't intentional. Oh, and sticking with the horror theme, there are a couple of other creepy moments that can be found in Saints Row 2. For example, if you head down into the Stillwater caverns, you can hear some very strange sounds. Now, given that this is a tourist attraction, there is every chance that these sounds are being played on speakers to add a creepy atmosphere for the visitors. But I don't think that's what this is. As far as I can tell, the ghostly voice doesn't say anything in particular, but if you can make anything out, let me know in the comments. The other creepy find is probably the creepiest of the lot. If you stand outside of this house, you can hear this.
You want to lose that? Yeah, you do. Shut up! Shut the fuck up! Shut up! Mother! You did this to me, Mother! Don't you make that face at me! Don't make that face!
Now, the most popular theory behind these strange noises is that someone inside is watching the TV, albeit really loudly. I mean, I guess it makes sense, but I'd like to think that it's something much more sinister. Okay, time for something a little more lighthearted now. The soundtrack in Saints Row 2 is excellent, and it turns out that your character thinks so too. When driving around Stillwater, your character will sing along to certain songs on the radio, with my personal favourites being Aha's Take On Me, and Queen's Final Countdown.
It's the final countdown!
Speaking of the radio, a much harder to notice detail can be heard when changing the station. You see, when in an older car, changing stations sounds like this. So a sort of old clicking sound. Well, here's what happens if you change the station in a newer model.
Funk 98.
So, given that the car is newer, there is no clicking button sound. I know this is a small detail, but I think it's really cool. The final radio detail is one that has been recommended to me a couple of times before, which is strange as it didn't work when I tried to record it. One of the radio stations in the game is underground, which, as the name suggests, is an underground pirate radio station. Now, clever players actually figured out where the radio tower for Radio Underground could be found, and apparently if you destroyed the radio tower, then Underground would stop broadcasting. The thing is, I tried this multiple times, and no matter what I did, the station continued as if nothing had happened.
Shoe. An anonymous individual hid goodies of a different sort in the Stillwater River. As well as those belonging to a street gang known as the Sons of Somebody were found floating down the coast. Could this be a bloody...
I don't know, maybe I'm missing something, but for now at least, this detail is a bust. Now, this next detail was actually featured in last week's episode of Hidden Video Game Details, but if I'm covering Saints Row 2 details, I have to include it here. In the Chinatown district, you can find a gong that doesn't react when you shoot at it. Well, if you grab a nearby NPC and launch them into it, this will happen.
Police.
Now, in real life, throwing numerous people into a giant gong would surely attract attention, and it does that in Saints Row 2. If you commit crimes, NPCs will stop to take a photo of you. So, Saints Row games have never been afraid to make risque jokes, and if you go to the cemetery, you can find this. So underneath a graveyard, which, let me remind you, is where people bury their loved ones, is a sex cavern that is full of blow-up dolls. I mean, I'm all for letting people do what they want as long as it's not harming anyone else, but having a sex dungeon hidden underneath the graveyard does seem kind of weird. So another detail that we covered in last week's Hidden Video Game Detail series was the fact that depending on the location, NPCs would drop different amounts of money. For example, NPCs in city centres would drop piles of cash for you to pick up. However, if you go to a poorer area of the city, like the trailer park at Elysian Fields, NPCs would only drop coins.
Send you home. Yeah!
Now, I must have forgotten that coins were in Saints Row 2, as I couldn't remember picking them up, but it turns out there are a couple of ways to find coins. For example, you can destroy the tourist binoculars for a few cents, and you can even break newspaper stands if you're really that hard up. Speaking of being hard up, if you're in need of cash, you can of course hold up a store. Simply walk in, flash your gun, and the person behind the counter will usually hand over the money. The thing is, not every shopkeeper is the same, and if you attempt to hold up this store, things won't go as planned. So the person behind the counter won't even acknowledge your existence, let alone hand over the cash. Well, that's because he's blind, so he has no idea that you're pointing a gun at his face. I love this detail. Right, let's end today's video with a cameo from Volition themselves. At this location on the map, you can find this. So after performing a jump that the Dukes of Hazzard would be proud of, you will find yourself in the offices of Volition, aka the people that made the game you're playing. I mean, if I'm honest, there's not much to see here, apart from this photo, which I'm guessing is one of the people that worked on the game. So that's it. If you enjoyed this trip down memory lane, then please leave a like. If you are a fan of Easter eggs and hidden details in games, then perhaps consider subscribing, as that's what this channel is all about. Thank you all for watching, and I'll speak to you all soon.